Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this ESPON event on climate-neutral territories. My name is Pooyan Maleki, Senior Policy and Research Consultant on EU energy and climate topics at ECORIS. And on behalf of ESPON, I have the pleasure of introducing this event to you, as well as moderating the first three discussions. The event of today is the third in a series of events organized by ESPON that presents and discusses research results of the ESPON thematic action plans. Indeed, ESPON is an EU-funded program aiming to support territorial development and cohesion. This is done through providing data, analysis, and policy recommendations related to spatial planning across Europe. Now, as part of the European Green Deal, the European Commission has set the objective to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. This ambitious plan has multiple interrelated aims, such as to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, boost renewable energy use, and transition the economy towards a circular one, all while ensuring a just transition for all citizens and regions. The ESPON thematic action plan on climate-neutral territories aligns this objective with the European Commission. It does so by providing crucial territorial evidence to help cities and regions to advance towards climate neutrality. Current projects within the thematic action plan are diverse, focusing on renewable energy on land and sea, decarbonization of local energy markets, energy efficiency, greenhouse gas reduction, sustainable land use, as well as the circular economy. Now, by addressing challenges and opportunities, different projects aim to provide evidence and guidance for cities and regions, and these will help them understand territorial consequences of different development pathways for a fair and sustainable transition towards a climate-neutral Europe by 2050. The projects that will be here today and present their results are the following. Firstly, the Tandem project, which provides a territorial analysis of decentralized energy markets. Secondly, the CoBRAN project, which looks at territorial cooperation for blue renewable energy. Thirdly, Clean Energy for Central Europe project, which provides a targeted analysis putting clean energy transition policies into practice in Central Europe. And then there is the No Net Land Take project, investigating policies and practices in European regions. Moreover, the CIRCTA project update, which is updating a set of indicators on a circular economy. And last but not least, the Green Industrialization Policy Brief, providing a territorial perspective on green industrialization. The ESPON Territorial Action Plan considers that climate neutrality is a territorial challenge. Local and regional governments are responsible for shaping the places we live in, from energy systems to transportation networks, waste management, and land use. But they cannot act alone. Collaboration between different levels of governance, sectors, and borders is really essential. And that's why we're here today. This is not just another discussion. It's a dynamic talk show style event designed to foster real engagement. We're bringing together experts, policymakers, practitioners to exchange knowledge, share experience, and find solutions that work. So, we would also like to engage not only those who are here, but also you, our remote audience. We want to hear what your thoughts and what you think, involve you in the conversation, and answer your questions. So please, you can send your questions on Slido, and you can do so by scanning on the screen, or go to Slido and fill the code ESPON. So our discussions today are structured around 5 main sessions. Within the thematic action plan for climate-neutral territories, ESPON have initiated 3 projects around the energy transition, with a slightly different focus. Now, the first is on localized energy markets, the second is on blue renewable energy, and the third is on regions in Central Europe. Because there's a bit of an overlap and different focuses of these projects, we've decided to devote the first 3 sessions of today's event on energy issues. Both researchers and a policymaker from the Tandem, CoBRAN, and Clean Energy for CE projects will present their findings and discuss those results. The first session will focus on the current situation and general trends regarding the energy transition. The second session will shed some light on the activities that take place at the subnational level in regions and cities to steer their territories towards climate neutrality. The third session in this morning will examine how collaboration and cooperation beyond administrative boundaries can really accelerate the energy transition. During the afternoon, 2 sessions will address critical aspects for climate neutral territories. The first will look into the role of the circular economy in climate neutrality. During this, the CIRCTA project has developed territorial evidence on the current status of various circular economy practices. In addition to that, the OECD will share their experiences on various circular initiatives that they have also initiated. Finally, the last session of today will address how urban, regional and maritime spatial planning can support the net zero greenhouse gas ambitions. Findings will be presented from the No Net Land Take project and the COBAM project, and as well as the policy brief on territorial aspects of green industrialization. There will be a particular focus on opportunities and barriers of spatial planning. Now, to conclude this introduction, we would like to underline the fact that climate neutral territories are not just an end goal. They are a process requiring continuous innovation, cooperation, and policy alignment. By working together across borders, sectors, and governance levels, we can really accelerate this transition and build a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable place to live. So let's dive into the discussions for today. Thank you again for being here, and we're very excited to shape the future together to work towards climate neutral territories. Now, moving on to the first session. As I mentioned a few moments ago, the first part of this morning will focus primarily on energy issues. And the specific first session, we have researchers from the Tandem and COBRA and Clean Energy for CE project. In this session, the ESPON projects will start by investigating and describing the current status and trends of the issues that they cover. To be able to discuss and compare the status and trends of the energy transition from different angles, each of the researchers will present their findings of their project, and the speaker from the Clean Energy for Central Europe project will focus on regions in Central Europe. The speaker from the COBRAM project will focus on the marine environment, and the speaker from the Tandem project will focus on the development of energy communities in all pan-European regions. The speakers will then explain what is going well, what are the drivers that they found to accelerate the energy transition in their projects, but they will also explain the obstacles and what could be innovative solutions to overcome these obstacles. And now, I'm very happy to present to you our distinguished speakers in our first session. First of all, we have Jaroslav Klusak from CEMO and the Clean Energy for Central Europe project. Jaroslav completed his PhD in environmental economics at the University of Prague. Since 2020, he has served as the energy manager of the city of Prague, and Jaroslav is also a member of the Sustainable Energy Board of the Office of the Government of the Czech Republic. He's currently engaged with Charles University in Prague, working on the strategic project called Synergies. With plenty of hands-on experience in municipal energy management dating back to 2004, he's published extensively in fields of energy and energy management. Really good to have you with us today, Jaroslav. Sitting next to Jaroslav, we have Josh Roberts from ResCoop EU, who's working on the Tandem Territorial Analysis of Decentralized Energy Markets project. Josh works as a senior policy advisor for ResCoop EU, which is the federation of citizen energy cooperatives and energy communities. And he represents energy cooperatives in the fields of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and flexibility. Since 2012, he's been providing legal expertise in Brussels on EU law, energy and climate law, including on internal energy market and renewable energy. Prior to that, he practiced environmental law in London. Great to see you, Josh. Then last but not least, we have Sander de Toom from the COBAM project on territorial cooperation on blue renewable energy. Sander works in the Dutch Marine Energy Centre and is a regulatory specialist on offshore renewable energy, including offshore solar, wave, tidal energy, offshore storage, OTEC, and salinity gradient. With a very strong academic foundation in energy politics and international political economy, Sander brings a strategic collaborative approach to his work. He actively engages with technology developers, research and testing institutions, stakeholders in the offshore and maritime industries, but is also involved with investors and policymakers in order to see how to drive innovation and effectively shape the regulatory frameworks. Once again, I would like to remind the audience, before going to the questions to the speakers, I would like to remind the audience that you too can ask questions to our panelists. Moreover, and very importantly, we would also like to ask you a number of questions, our online participants, but we would like to reflect on the results together with here with our panelists. So please, log on. You can actually already start reading some of the questions we'll be posing you, and the answers will be reflected on shortly by our panelists. So, opening question for you, Jaroslav. You have been investigating the energy transition in Central Europe. From what you've been looking at, can you please tell us the state of play of the implementation of energy transition strategies and action plans at the different levels in Central Europe, and perhaps tell us more precisely the territorial coverage that you've been looking at in your project? So, over to you, Jaroslav.
Okay, thank you for the question. Good morning to everyone. So, the broad answer is that it differs. The energy transition differs very much between countries in the Central Europe, and it also differs between regions in Central Europe. So, when we go to the slides, not sure. The first one is that in this, and it also differs how you evaluate the energy transition. If you evaluate it based on the existence of some strategy documents like energy plans and so on in the local authorities, or you are looking for some progress in energy transition, or you are looking for some concrete data and avoid the concrete data about the energy transition. So as you can see on the slide, there is like a chart with some information about existence of strategy documents in the countries, and in this slide you can see that we just realized a survey within local authorities in Central Europe. We got about 180 answers back, and we asked also about the existence of some strategy documents and so on. So we can see that in Central Europe there are some like front runners, like countries like Germany, Austria, Croatia or Italy, which have we got a lot of answers about the existence of the strategic documents on the local level. And there are also some countries which are mostly linked to the east in the Central Europe, like post-Soviet countries, like Czech Republic, Hungary, or for example Poland, where there were like a little bit less answers about some existence of the strategic documents on the local level. It's one view as you can have for the implementation or some changes on the energy transition. When you go a little bit deeper and you are asking for some satisfaction or for some results about energy transition, you will get some results about some like a positive correlation between the existence of the strategic document and with the satisfaction of the implementation and achieving some like concrete goals. So we can see this correlation in countries like Austria, Germany, and also Slovenia. And we can also see some like a negative correlation between countries or local authorities where are like a very big portion of the strategic document, but they are not so satisfied with the implementation. This is like a countries like Italy or Poland and so on. And it's one approach how you can evaluate it, and to give some like concrete numbers about all Central Europe. So in our research, we find that about 67% of the countries or local authorities have some like a strategic documents about with some energy transition goals and so on, but only a little bit more than 40% of the local authorities are satisfied with the implementation and with the concrete results. So it's like some main broader findings about the implementation and so on.
Fascinating to hear, Jaroslav. Thank you for sharing. I'm sure myself and some of us listening would be curious to hear, is there any further data or evidence that you'd like to share with us to support your findings on the progress made towards the energy transition? I think this would be really interesting to take stock of.
Yeah. Okay, sure. We just use in our project we use 4 main indicators for the energy transition. First one is of course the changes in CO2 emissions and so on. The second one is the final energy consumption. I just would like to remind that for CO2 emissions and also for the energy consumption, we were able to get to the local level. So we have I will show in a while the maps and the data for the NUTS 2 or NUTS 3 regions in Central Europe. So I think it's something innovative for example, the CO2 emissions for the NUTS 3 level. And we also use the indicator like the RES share or share of the renewable energy sources or production in the concrete energy production in the region. And we also the 4th indicator was the share of innovations or green patents within the Central European countries. So for the first one, for the data about the CO2. I will try to go to the slides again. We can see. For the CO2 emission, we had the data for comparison for the 20 years. So we have the data since 2004. I think it's this slide. Yeah, it's this slide. 2004 to 2002 to 2022, and in this. Main results are that we can see some significant decrease in the CO2 emission within this 20 years period in countries like Germany, Austria, and also in some regions in Italy, for example, for the Veneto region. And we can also see some significant increase in again, in the countries like you can see the red one and so on in Poland and also in Croatia or in Italy. And what is also interesting, and I mentioned it in the beginning, that when you see the green line and decrease of CO2 emissions, mostly in Germany, there are also some regions which are like facing the increasing of the CO2 emissions is, for example, the regions near the Karlsruhe, and it's due to commissioning of a coal power plant in this area. And what is really important, and it will be also similar in energy consumption, is the east-west line. So in the countries which are situated to the west of the Central Europe, we can see mostly the positive trend, so the decrease of the CO2 emissions, and with the countries which are to the east from the Central, we can see some increase in CO2 emissions. And also important is that on the local level, you can see some disparities between capitals, for example. For example, for Czech Republic, for Prague, you see most of the decrease in CO2 increase in the CO2 emission, and for example, in Poland, for Warsaw, you can see some like a decrease. And when we go to the last slide, to energy consumption, so in the energy consumption, we can see also in regions which had like a historical high energy consumption, we can see some like a decrease in energy consumption, and also, as I mentioned, there's some west-east line, so we can see that the regions which are situated to the east, there are some like more increase in energy consumption and so on. And for example, in Czechia, we see no significant changes, and for countries like Germany, Slovenia, Italy, there are some like a significant decrease in energy consumption. And to sum up it, so one of our conclusion is that the energy transition in the Central Europe is not only driven, of course, by some increasing of the renewable sources and so on, but it has very like a strong correlation with energy efficiency on the municipalities and on the local level and so on. So it's also important to focus also on the energy efficiency.
Brilliant, Jaroslav. Looking forward to seeing further results there. Josh, so I have the pleasure of working with you on the Tandem project on decentralized energy, territorial analysis of the decentralized energy markets. We're reaching quite some interesting moments in our project as it comes to near the close. What I'd like to ask you to share with the audience is, how are energy communities distributed across European regions and cities, and what are their spatial characteristics and contexts? For instance, are they predominantly in rural areas, urban areas, coastal areas, or perhaps you can give some insights on where we've been finding these initiatives. Please.
Sure. Yeah, thanks a lot, Puyan. I mean, first, just to give a little bit of context into the project itself. So ESPON Tandem, the real aim of that project is mainly three things. The first is that we have tried to map all of the existing energy community initiatives across Europe, and trying to understand exactly what that is. What is the territorial distribution of these projects? But then also, to underlie that, we conducted a survey of energy communities across Europe to kind of better understand what their characteristics are, what their makeup is, and maybe try to understand why they may or may not be popping up in certain places. And I think it's also important first to say what we mean by an energy community. What we are talking about here is, by and large, not exclusively, but primarily local projects where you're bringing citizens, local authorities, and SMEs together who are taking co-ownership of renewable energy generation or other energy services and providing that back to the members, either as a service or providing other benefits to the local community. So, I mean, in terms of what we've been able to come up with, and I can show you a map here. That's not it. Let's see here. There we go. All right, that is the map that we have. Just one qualification, so this is not a finalized map. We're still undergoing the finalization of the data, including quality checks to make sure what we've covered is our actual energy communities, because there are many different types of local projects that we have to differentiate from. It's hard to see from this, but by and large, I mean, the answer is kind of mixed, and it really depends on the characteristic of the country. No country is equal. They all have different geographical characteristics. And I could probably use Denmark as a good example. If you could hone in there on Copenhagen, you would see a rather large concentration of energy communities. But then if you go to the western part of the country, you also see a very large concentration of energy communities. Why is that? It's because you have a large degree of wind production that can be harvested, and the wind industry was essentially invented in Denmark, the first projects being energy communities. So you do have a rich ecosystem of community-owned wind in Western Denmark, along with a rich history of cooperatively owned district heating networks. So, but then, I mean, if you go into Poland, for instance, This also interplays with the policy context, but you will see mostly energy communities in rural areas. So, and where I live in the Wallonian region of Belgium, most of the projects that are community owned you will see in rather rural areas. There are natural reasons for this. Communities tend to be more close-knit. There is more production potential in rural areas. And in Brussels, for instance, there's not a lot of production potential. You have an airport nearby. There are natural characteristics that kind of prevent this. So, I mean, that's just to give you a general overview of how they're distributed throughout Europe.
Very good. Thank you very much, Josh. So energy communities, there's been quite some legislation on the European level to try to promote the uptake of them over recent years. And there's also been quite a lot of political attention to the topic. But there are quite some barriers to their development still, right? Maybe you can describe to our audience what are the main issues and obstacles that they're facing to really reach their full potential. Is it their spatial characteristics? Is it the contextual considerations? Is it legal, financial? Well, perhaps you can let us know what are the key sticking points for initiatives to get off the ground.
I'll start with the spatial and contextual characteristics. I mean, by and large, one of the biggest and most general trends that we see is that energy communities generally tend to be found in Western Europe, and they're only starting to emerge in Eastern Europe. A lot of this has to do with how cooperatives are perceived in Western and particularly in Northern Europe. You do have a more rich history of cooperativism, and that is creeping in Central and Eastern Europe, but it's still a bit of a touchy subject. You can look at disposable income levels. That also has some historical relevance to the development of these types of initiatives. And so there are certainly societal issues here at play. However, I would say these are being overtaken by policy. I mentioned the rural versus urban distinction in Poland, for instance. One of the main reasons why you won't find an energy community in an urban area in Poland is because the policy doesn't allow it. It largely requires energy communities to be set up in rural areas, and it kind of prevents certain sectors of society from doing this. You contrast that with France. One of the interesting characteristics of this as a legal concept is that a renewable energy community needs to be defined by its geographical proximity. So it's really intended to get people that are living in the area to be able to invest in the project. In France, if you live in a rural area, this geographical proximity is actually expanded because you need a broader base for people to invest in a project. Whereas in another country like Croatia, the concept is really limited to the district level. So the amount of people that you can actually get investing into the project is quite limited. So, I mean, these are just a sample size of the characteristics. A lot of it has to do with the engagement from local municipalities. That's one thing that we found also from our survey, is that when you have local partners at the local level, mostly the municipality or other organizations, and also just renewable energy development generally. That requires a good governance framework. It requires certainty from investors, and other things like this, a sound regulatory framework that you can navigate. This is also quite hard for energy communities. So. System operators, this is probably a term that most viewers won't even understand. Local communities will find that hard as well. So the amount of engagement that the local actors have with the citizens is also going to determine how well these initiatives arise.
Very insightful, Josh. Thanks very much for sharing these. Now over to you, Sander. You've been investigating offshore renewable energy resources, meaning ocean energy derived from wind, power of currents, tides, and waves. How can the overall capacity and perhaps also the efficiency of offshore renewable energy resources be improved while identifying and taking into account potentially conflicting interests?
Yeah, it's not a simple question, to be honest. I think, first of all, it's very important to say that offshore renewable energy will be a driving force in the entire energy transition. Not the only one, but definitely play a key role in it. And for our project, the ESPON project, together with Wageningen University and Deloitte, we looked at exactly this dilemma. And we took stock of what has already been undertaken, and there has been quite some projects, some cross-border, some sea basin projects, where they looked into the spatial claim of offshore renewable energy, how that fits with other uses, but looking at pan-European, like the entire EU, but also the overseas territories, that's an enterprise that hasn't been undertaken enough. This project, fortunately, gave us the opportunity to do so. And we, of course, took a lot of these lessons at a more local level and see how they applied. Were they best practices indeed, or how do they compare? And what can be done for a level playing field, and what is actually, what are some of the opportunities for the future? So, first of all, well, you mentioned the different types of offshore renewable energy. I think it's good to take a second to explain that as well, because offshore wind is maybe the most mature industry here. Fixed bottom wind, so that's actually a monopile in the sea bottom. But you also have other varieties. Floating wind is growing quite rapidly recently. But floating offshore solar, which can even be placed within an offshore wind park, is developing their first projects. Wave energy, and unfortunately, not all the different types of offshore renewable energy were included in this project, so that's definitely a recommendation for the future projects. There are other types, ocean thermal energy conversion, different types of tidal energy. So there's definitely a lot of technologies that can play a role in the further future, because one of the reasons why you should look at that is also because of the spatial claim and the potential synergies if you look at all of the different options and you have a bigger portfolio to finish this puzzle. So for this project, we looked at this region, and we didn't look only at where can you best place offshore wind, for instance, but also where could you best place offshore wind and wave energy. We looked at a lot of different metrics, and from the wave climate to the depth of the sea. Of course, there are a lot more parameters you can look at. You can also look at where the energy demand is, and we didn't do so here. But for further research, it's definitely something that will drive projects, as well as zooming in. So we zoomed out in this project. For next project, you can also zoom in again, because then you will definitely see some of the choices made at a very smaller level, which of course, while this map might look some detailed, if you zoom in, you can see that there's definitely some things that you should also take into account. This map already looks a little bit more complicated. This one also looks into the potential synergy and barriers for offshore renewable energy, also taking stock of other uses, other claims of the sea. My project partner Frank from Deloitte will talk about this in the final session of today, so that's the reason to watch the full webinar today, I think. And he will expand on a lot of these synergies. And I think this project really provided some good oversight on these different opportunities that can present themselves if you look from a more holistic view, and not only look at one actor, one interest versus another, but where can you actually see interests overlap that can actually simultaneously coexist, And at the other moments, you can see areas that are not that busy or not that invested, and maybe then you can actually look into where you can take some further steps to accelerate this energy transition. I believe I have one more slide. Well, this is actually the final slide, sorry. But this one actually shows us that we're already very actively using the sea. I'm from the Netherlands, the North Sea, which is one of the busiest seas, and the offshore renewable energy transition will definitely make that puzzle even more complicated. At the same time, it also presents a lot of opportunities. If you can see the amount of companies, but also researchers looking into to this area, and not only looking into the more mature industries such as offshore wind, but also looking into a vision further along, because the targets that we've set ourselves, not only at national level, but also at the EU, are not only for 2025 or 2030, but also for 2050. And at that moment, you also need to understand that we don't go through the energy transition once. It's a process, like you referred to in the very beginning. So we have to potentially make this puzzle for the rest of our life.
Great, thanks very much, Sander. Fascinating maps. I look forward to just glaring at them for hours on end after this workshop. Perhaps you can share with us shortly some perhaps best practices, examples of situations where these conflicts have been effectively addressed and reconciled.
So yeah, I think that's a question that we often get, and for now I would just focus on the offshore renewables side of it, because as I mentioned, Frank will provide a more wider approach to this. But you can also already see some case studies where, for instance, wave energy is simultaneously integrated with offshore wind. In Portugal, for instance, where you can see that the waves arrive 7 hours after the wind. So you've got a complementary energy profile. In Belgium and the Netherlands, there are some first pilots with offshore solar, integrating that with offshore winds, and you again see this complementarity not only on a daily basis, but also on a seasonal basis, because in the winter there's more wind, and in the summer there's more sun. Apart from these physical projects, I think it's also interesting to note that the national targets, while there is an ocean energy target at EU level and national level, there are only a few countries that have set targets for offshore renewables other than offshore wind. And even at floating wind, there are also some small, well, not small, but some targets. However, a lot of countries try to approach it more technology agnostic. The question does arise whether that's always the best scenario, or whether you should actually look into what the potential synergies are for your sea basin and proactively support that.
Brilliant stuff, Sander. Thanks very much. So, conflicting interests. We've heard the perspective from the offshore renewables project. What's been going on in terms of addressing conflicts, resolving conflicts within the projects of yours, Jaroslav and Josh? Josh, perhaps we can start with you. What types of conflicts are energy communities coming across, and how well equipped are energy communities to reconcile interests?
Yeah, so I think the main two that really come to mind are just public acceptance generally. NIMBYism, do I want a wind turbine in my backyard? Maybe it's messing up my view. That's kind of the first impact. And we've seen this both onshore and offshore. But then the other is the environmental concern. A lot of people are concerned about the environment, not just climate change. They're also interested in birds and wildlife and whatnot. So I think this does create a complex picture. One third maybe aggravating factor is the fact that a lot of these renewable developments are coming in and the people that live there have very little opportunity to participate in the process. One of the bridges that energy communities provide is allowing local communities to actually take back agency in that decision-making process, not just in being able to have a say in how the project is designed, but ultimately money is being made from all of these projects. That's no secret. If the community owns the project, though, they have that money, and that is a pot of money that they can maintain in the local economy. It works for them. It stays. It's part of this like local circular economy. So you get people on board with that vision, and their mentality around the project really changes. And I can just use an example of Middelgrunden. It's a project, a very old project actually, in the city of Copenhagen. It was one of the first offshore wind projects. There was a lot of polarization around this. People living next to the seaside saying, "Oh, my view of the sea is now tarnished." They just had to repower it, and they made it a political priority to do so because that project has become so important to the local community. It's almost like their Eiffel Tower because they own it, and it gives them a sense of local pride. So I think that is just kind of an example of what, you know, a community-driven renewable energy project can really do with these types of conflicting interests. But it takes some give and play between commercial developers, the local authorities, and the citizens themselves.
Very interesting to hear energy communities, you know, are being used as an effective vehicle to address public acceptance concerns, which are, of course, major obstacle for all types of energy transition projects. Jaroslav, has your project been looking much at these conflicting interests? And if so, what have you come across in Central Europe?
Okay, we find some conflicts when we were mapping on the local in the Central Europe, like the energy transition. So we didn't go deeper in like concrete actions like energy communities and so on. But we see a lot of disparities between like the national targets, regional targets, and local targets for the energy transition. So that there were not like a good connection between, for example, national and regional targets in some countries. That there are some countries, for example, like Poland and also Czech Republic, which set up some like national goals, which were mostly based on some like EU goals and so on. But these goals didn't split into concrete regions, and there were not like the support for this region to fulfill and to help the national authorities to take care or to fulfill these targets. And we also see these conflicts on the local level that, for example, where there's some like regional energy strategy in the concrete country, so it didn't split up again to the local authorities and so on. And we also saw some like funny stories, like for example there were some like regions in, for example, Czech Republic, where it's like a big potential on the local level for the geothermal energy and so on, but this goal of the like using of geothermal energy and so on wasn't set up in the regional strategies and so on. So it was mostly the conflict, and also the conflict with the data, or the lack of data for evaluate the implementation on the local level.
Very interesting to hear. Thank you, Jaroslav. So, we've heard some very interesting insights from our panelists, but now it's really important for us to also hear from you. So, we'd like to invite you once again to Slido. We see that many of you have already connected, so perhaps we can share again the QR code, and in doing so, we can actually go to the results. There's still time to vote, so the very first question we'd like to put forward to you should be a relatively simple one for you all to answer, but we want to get a good feel of your sense on this. The first question being, within the territory that you are from, to what extent do you feel sufficient progress is being made towards achieving the energy transition? We know we have quite a diverse set of participants, both in terms of the geographical spread and as well as the specific roles and backgrounds that they are from. So we have already some results coming in. Just to be clear, that number 10 is, let's say, going perfectly, and 0 is that it's a bit of a disaster. So, yeah, I see more for votes for it. Sander, I feel you want to say something
Well,
here,
no,
right?
just the first response I got from it is that all of these numbers are progress, so it's good to see that there's actually progress made.
Absolutely.
No, but I can definitely imagine that this is a question that maybe changes from month to month, because personally, when I look at the news, once I see very good news, and the other moments I see definitely some challenges popping up, even in the offshore renewable energy transition, which is a transition with very long lead times and a long-term vision that you need, that you still see that day-to-day decisions impact it.
Very interesting statement. Anything above 1 is progress. Would you agree, Josh and Jaroslav, with this?
Yeah, maybe my idea is that it go in hand with our findings, because in our sample of local authorities, we found that about 42, I think, % was satisfied with the energy transition. So we are here somewhere in the middle. So it go in lines also with our result or with our figures. So,
Josh, what are your thoughts on this? And also, what are your thoughts with this denseness between the numbers 4 and 5? We have double digits in terms of voters, and is it coincidence or is it understandable that everyone's lurking around it's going okay?
Yeah, to me, this begs a couple more questions, maybe, and it seems like the respondents are sitting on the fence a little bit. And if I have to take anything from this, it's that there is a general. What I would like to know is, what is the support for the energy transition? My guess is that it is fairly positive, but that the respondents are potentially frustrated with how the process is going. I would certainly put myself in that camp as well. It is a very nuanced question. Maybe it's going too fast, maybe it's going too slow. I think that requires a little bit of digging into, but yeah, that's about as far as I could go, I think, with that one.
Okay, so going on to the next question, which would require a little bit more proactive thinking from our participants, which we very much look forward to taking stock of. So the question is, what is the main barrier in your territory for achieving the energy transition? We've discussed quite some barriers amongst the presentations and discourses of our speakers, but we're particularly keen to hear what the rest of the online audience think. Perhaps, Sander, we can start again with you. We have already quite a number of inputs in the word cloud.
Just briefly from my own experience, I definitely recognize this. Just from the Netherlands, for instance, the law legislating offshore wind is called the Offshore Wind Law. And at the moment, feeding in offshore solar or wave energy would not be supported by that legal framework in a large scale. So definitely legislation trying to keep up with the rapid pace of the energy transition will be a challenge for the next couple of years.
What do you think, Josh?
Yeah, for me, this is much easier to answer. I agree with legislation, although I would add a qualification: implementation of legislation. And I think it's closely followed by money. I mean, not necessarily the existence of money, but necessarily the prioritization of money. And I give energy communities specifically as an example. We've had EU legislation on energy communities since 2019. Member states, many of them have legislation on energy communities because of their requirement to put that EU legislation into their national legislation. But by and large, most of this legislation is not being implemented or is not being implemented properly. So in that sense, I think that is kind of, it's almost putting our money where our mouth is and actually doing what is required. With money, I mean, EU, especially when it comes to public funding, there's a number of public funding for everything, and at the EU level, there's a bunch that's going to member states that's being put towards energy. But what we've also found is that this is often inaccessible for actors like energy communities. So I think that also identifies a gap in how either from the financial institution side, whether they understand what's going on and they're comfortable in investing in it, or on the other side, whether the barriers towards accessing that money is too stringent.
Thanks, Josh. How about yourself, Jaroslav?
Maybe just a quick comment for me, or for the situation of the Central Europe, maybe except countries like Austria or Germany, I prefer that from my point of view, it's mostly like the political will or the political commitment, because it's still in the Central European countries, it's still not the topic which can secure the politician a lot of votes, like the green energy and energy transition and so on. And if there are some like good projects and so on on the local authorities, we are still struggling from like the political commitment or for some like a political support. There is, for example, in Czech Republic, there is like we have 6,000 municipalities, and there are some like few mayors or vice mayors which are really keen on about the energy transition and green energy and so on. So it's mostly the work of the politician and this gap.
Very interesting to hear these differing regional perspectives as well. Now, to go to the third and final question to our audience. What would you consider as the main driver for the energy transition in your territory? So we flip it from barrier to driver. This is perhaps a very important input from your side on how we, projects as well as policymakers and legislators, can take action to effectively overcome barriers. What are your thoughts? What can be a really critical mechanism to bring about the change we need? So perhaps I can start with you this time, Jaroslav.
Okay.
Do you see the results shaping up?
Yeah. For me, it's something like because we mostly work with the municipalities or the local authorities, so it's something like a motivation of the people and the local offices to work on this project, and it's a little bit more connected with the question before, with the political will and so on. So if somebody like the boss of the municipality or the office will be able to motivate the people and to set up like a good condition for the work and for this project, it can work. So it's my point of view.
I find two responses there very interesting. Politics and in particular Green parties. So Josh, of course, just over a month ago, we had an event at the European Parliament where all of the major EU political parties showcased their support for energy communities. Of course, it was the European Greens who were the initial supporters, but now we had a broad spread ranging from the left to the EPP. So how do you see the cross-cutting political support as being a really important driver for the energy transition?
That's not a word you hear often, cross-cutting political support. I think that has a lot to do with the word here, informational spread, more or less how it is spread. In other words, how are we communicating with each other? Again, if I'm just using my own experience with energy communities, there is a way to get people to buy into energy communities, and that can be everything from telling them that it's good for the climate to just explaining the business case and about how it's helping their local community. I think there are a lot of different ways to reach people, and I think it's very important to keep this in mind when we are communicating about the energy transition, not just the costs of the energy transition, but also the benefits. There's something in this for everybody, and it's just a matter of getting people to sort of not even necessarily agree with each other, but understand what the objective is. Everybody can have their own drivers, but really using that to bring people together. And I say that because I see energy communities as a way to bridge people from these different political divides, and this event that you refer to in the European Parliament is just evidence of that.
Great. So now time for some questions, or a question from the audience. I see one coming through right now, and I think, Jaroslav, it's directed towards you. The question is on the relevance of offshore renewables to Central Europe. The map that you showed demonstrated rather limited coastal coverage for Central Europe. Does this mean offshore renewables have much relevance for Central Europe? How would you see this from the findings of your study?
Yeah. When we do like a research in local authorities and so on, so the topic of the offshore didn't occur very often, or mostly we didn't see any big potential for in Central Europe for the local authorities. So it was mostly like the potential of the solar energy or the wind energy, like in the wind energy, and so it's and it was. Also, as I mentioned, the energy transition was mostly driven in our local authorities by energy efficiency. So it wasn't so like a big topic for the local authorities now.
Thanks very much, Jaroslav. I'm afraid that's all we have time for in this discussion. I would like to sincerely thank all of our speakers for their fascinating insights, but also the important work that they're doing within their projects. We look forward, myself and I'm sure the audience, to really delving into the results once they are published and seeing how we can, really make use of them and bring them to life, particularly the policy recommendations which will come out of all of your analyses. We're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back at 10:45 for the second session discussing subnational activities towards climate neutralities. Thank you again for your participation, and please do stay with us for the next session. Bye-bye for now.